the meeting to order, and let's look at minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from 10/10/2017? Remco, Sarah's seconding.
Yes.
Any? I had some edits on some of the alternative sites. I think we mixed up Ann's Woods. So if everyone can kind of look at Ann's Woods versus the transfer station.
What page here?
10.8.1.
Page on the top.
6, like 6, 7. I think that there was some confusion about where the gun club was. I thought the gun club is close to the transfer station.
Yes.
I recorded
Woods.
that they
And
were
Ann's
close
Woods.
to the transfer station as also Ann's Woods.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
they're
right,
both?
Right
yeah.
next to each other.
Okay. So that should also be in,
I will add it to the transfer station.
yep. And did anyone else have any other things that they saw that were, I want to make sure that this is accurate because this is the thing that people are going to be looking at when, see Ann's Woods close to the gun range, and you're going to throw that in the transfer station. And then there was one that was potential community issues on the transfer station. Is that a community issue, or was it Ann's Woods?
Ann's Woods.
So the community issue that's listed under 10.8.5, I think is more relevant to Ann's Woods and the Winthrop Field.
That's right.
Okay, that's what I believe JCJ had in their presentation as far as under
It's not accurate.
transfer station, but then we can also put it under Ann's Woods and
Well, I think actually transfer station has community issues
Okay.
because it's on it's on the landfill.
Yeah,
so
so
I would
right.
just add that then to Ann's Woods.
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely,
Yeah.
that's the
The
whole
other one.
key.
Okay,
Yeah,
no problem.
sorry, I'm not trying to be a nudge, but I just want to make sure that we've got everything that we went through.
Historical record's important for this.
Yeah.
Anything else that you didn't see or think needs to be noted in those alternatives? Okay, great, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Great. Invoices. Did I miss invoices, or did we?
No, we left it on there as a placeholder, but there's no invoices or contracts for review and approval this cycle.
Great, okay. So I think you're on. Are you on, or do we have anything else? Oh, okay.
Just housekeeping issues, yeah, working group updates, educational programming, maybe I'll just hit that really quickly. The second visioning session was held all day yesterday here in the media center. Yes, sir?
I have an educational programming question, so where do we raise that?
Sounds like now.
Okay, so I looked at the educational program, and one of the things, the draft.
Yep.
And there are a couple of things that I think are lightning rods or missing. And that is, I think that we need to have the tennis as part of the district's program, has to be part of our educational program because it is part of the site. Or somehow we need to address the fact that we currently have tennis courts and we can't remove them, or we have to acknowledge that we can't totally remove them. Because some of the scenarios show no tennis courts anywhere. And so I'm thinking that if we put them in the educational program as part of the district's educational program, maybe it's not obviously an elementary program, it's part of the district's program, then it justifies our discussion of the site as to whether or not they meet the educational program. So it's not in there, and I would suggest that we figure out a way to either, I mean, maybe this is the elementary and the interior of the building, so I don't know, but I'm very concerned about the sites, and it looks like some of them rank high, that don't have the tennis courts. Because I think financially it's foolish, but I think politically it's a non-starter.
In both towns.
Yes. So, and to justify it with MSBA, if you put it in the education program, then it marches down the path.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to defer that one to JCJ because while I agree that the educational program is gonna be leaned on heavily to inform the design, I don't know, it becomes a bit of a slippery slope. So I don't know if there's other placeholders in the PDP to include that as a non-starter, which I think there is, but.
So, two
don't
other
know.
comments.
Before you even, yeah, but before you even hit that, I think one thing you can always do, this is an educational plan, I believe, for Memorial School, but
Right,
when
that's-
we do make determinations in the materials that we submit to MSBA, and this is where I look to the consultants that, correct me if I'm wrong, we can explain, if we get to that point, that certain decisions are based on other program issues.
Okay.
Just like they wouldn't expect us to delete a part of this site for that program, we could say, you know, if we get to that point, that the tennis courts are part of other district programming that we have no intention to remove. So I don't know that it needs to be in this educational program, but we can still use it for the same reason and document that.
So I have a similar question about the issue in the educational program. It says that the after-school program needs its own space, and I think that that's something that we should talk about, whether it should actually have, it read to me, and I skimmed it really quickly, that it needed its dedicated space or its own space, and you know, is that really where we want to be? And then the third area is the issue that we have glossed over, but I think warrants discussion, is summer, what's it called, playground. Because, again, I'm thinking both operationally, but also, you know, you have huge voters. Then we can also talk about council on aging and all those other things. But in terms of, you know, but I think that those are things that currently all go on in in that site, and we should be deliberate about whether it's in the educational program or not, I don't care. But whether it's an addendum or additional considerations or whatever. So I think they all warrant deliberate thought.
Yeah, so we've talked a bit about the summer, and I think, Pam, did you want to kind of talk about summer, let's talk about where you are with that. Because summer playground and the after-school program are, we've talked about them in this planning.
Collaboration is where it's come up.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm trying to remember,
Do you want me to give an update?
no, what we talked about before our last meeting. So at the budget collaboration, we raised the issue and made clear to the town of Manchester that the youth services program, Parks and Rec, whatever the appropriate title is an existing program in the building, but isn't part of our educational program. So
Right.
it has to be handled as a separate financial matter. Although, in talking with you guys, because it's an existing space, we may find a way to accommodate it in the new building, but it isn't part of our educational plan. We don't have any oversight over it.
Right.
It does, and you were great at making this point yesterday, John, it does serve our students and provide before and after school care for them, but it's something that I think we would be hesitant of incorporating it into our educational plan.
So you have it in there right now as a line of, it needs its own dedicated space.
Yes, because it currently exists in the building, and that's what we're hoping we're
You
doing.
mean outside of the building?
No, either within the building or adjacent to the building, so that wasn't
Maybe
ready
this
for
might have
prime time. So I was hoping Stephen was gonna be able to take a peek at it first and kind of give us some pointers.
Not
So-
necessarily criticize this, it's
It's
more
not a
where are we on the
criticism,
issue?
we're still trying to figure out how much goes in there and in what context it goes in there to provide to provide an opportunity for the space to be built in, but clearly delineate for the town of Manchester that they'll have to pay for it separately.
So, I guess
And that's a political question, not an ed
Yeah.
programming question, is kind of where I'm at on this. So it can go in as a line very easily, or it could come out and go into a whole separate bucket.
So when does that happen? Because we were starting to say we've got our taxpayers who are, speaking Manchester, that are gonna be asking about that. So when in this process when do we talk about?
Right.
Then I've been confused about that. Like, when do we who has that hard
And
conversation?
who also makes that decision? I mean, that's your wish as the district administrator. And maybe the school committee has already blessed that decision to tell, or you could say, another way to do it is to say it's a school committee or a decision is like, sure, you can come in after 2:30 or whatever time of day ends, you can use the gym and the cafeteria the way we currently do it. And I'm going, just one, before I let you answer, I want to make sure that this committee really understands the education program. And I just go back, the mistake we made in the high school is that the education program was written, and the building was in schematic design, and we looked at the gym, and it had a 45-foot high ceiling. Remember? And we said, what on earth is this? And the architect said, in the educational program, the gym teachers said, we want to hold state tournaments for volleyball. We said, we don't have a volleyball team. Strike that. So, with all due respect to the administration and the teachers and so forth, I think as a committee, our obligation, when this is ready, before it goes off to MSBA, that we have looked at it and make sure that we're not building a volleyball court, and we don't have a volleyball team, or some equivalent. And tennis is one concern. I think after school has a lot of people who, and playground, who won't care, people won't care whether it's in the program or whatever, they just want to know that playground will still exist. So that's just my concern, and I want to make sure that we do not, no offense to anybody here, but that we don't carte blanche give our administrators and teachers the right to build the Taj Mahal Newton. And that we can say, we get it, we think that this is a plan, both construction-wise and education-wise, you know. So,
I think the struggle with, so the town has, at our last meeting, suggested that they would like space for youth services, and they'd also like us to run numbers and see if there's space available for senior center on the site. So that's in the works. They're supposed to be getting us some numbers on square footage of the senior center. I would say that the concern is if we are going to continue with the youth center, Parks and Rec, out of Memorial, what's come out of David Stevens' process and the envisioning, and just out of practical experience, and John, you should jump in and speak to this in terms of operations, is that because of the, it is morning and afternoon, but it is also afternoons during the day and in the summer, that somehow where it's placed either adjacent to or as part of the building, there's lockout abilities, because it's often in conflict with other programs that are going on in the building. So it's more of a space utilization issue than any concern to continue the program or discontinue the program. We like being neighbors with them, but I don't know that there's enough space the way the building's currently set up to have everything going on at the same time. I don't know if you want to speak to it.
No, there's kind of two separate issues. There's the summer playground, which is very different than the before and after school programs. The before and after school programs, you could very well say, is a part of our school. We have a lot of working families. They need care before and after school, and they also offer enrichment programs. The summer playground is a totally separate thing. The before and after school care, it would be nice for them to have their own space like some schools have, that then we could use in the day for other purposes. But the amount of space that the summer playground needs is probably more than what an MSBA project would entail. So that's where it gets tricky, I think.
So can we talk a little bit about why it has to be separate space if it happens after school? And I'm not trying to be shut it down. I just want to be really careful that we've pressed the issue, because if you go for funding in, because Manchester will bear the cost of any separate space, right? What if that gets, I mean, it would have to be a separate article, I would think, right?
That would be confusing.
And then what if it gets rejected? How do you go back to your design? I mean, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think we could live with the before and after school not being a separate space. The only tricky part is kindergarten on Wednesdays have a half day currently. I don't know how long that will continue. So we need a space then, but we make it work now.
Yeah.
The only thing that I was thinking of is at my son and daughter's school that was just built, they do have, a before and after school care room. So I didn't know if it was in the standards, and if it was, then we could use it for other things during the day. It would give us some extra space. But if not, we can move.
But I'm sure you guys have faced a challenge like that before, where it didn't have to be a separate thing that would have a separate cost to it. You build a flexible space that's kind
Yeah,
of,
best case scenario is you create a space that can be used to deliver your educational program, but either off hours or depending on how things are scheduled, to take advantage of it
Yeah.
for before and after school program.
So just to kind of process this out.
Well, can I just play devil's advocate to John for a second? Are you really going to want, I mean, I hear this from principals, not just here in other districts, are you going to want Parks and Rec in your educational spaces after hours?
Well, they already are.
Classrooms?
Yep.
Is that preferable? Does that support your program? What are the, I mean, this is also our opportunity to deal with some concerns that have existed.
I mean, it's,
Not his personally, he needs to go there.
I guess it's no different than this right now. I mean, we're in somebody's teaching space right now, and I'm sure we won't put everything back right the way it is, but I mean, it's fine. We're used to it. We wouldn't be able to like have enough
Yeah.
space so that the 12 knitting and painting and play and acting classes that we have their own space separate from the school.
Mhm.
We'll have to share some of that space.
Avi, do you want to?
So just from a, because I think I've wondered about this too, and it's come up a little bit at the budget collaboration, because we're trying to inform both towns about what's happening. Obviously, if you're in the town of Manchester, you've got this existing program, you want to know how it's going to be impacted. If you're in the town of Essex, you've got something that you're going to be paying a portion of, and you want to know how, how your contribution is going to be impacting something that may have nothing to do directly with the building. So it's an important topic. So as I understand the process steps that we have to go through, because I've had some conversations, not only in collaboration, but just asked Dora and Whittier about this as well, is step one, and JCJ's been helping as well, is that step one is to figure out what are we talking about in terms of space. So first, what do we have currently? What space does it involve? Second, is there anything additional that we need to know about that's on the town of Manchester's mind? So put that request out, say, can you just get back to us with some basics about the space you have, what you need, what it needs to do? And so then we take that information and we can provide it to our team to say, as you're going through options, how does this work? Can it fit within what we're gonna be doing anyway? Great. And then you would wanna make sure from an educational standpoint, just like Pam was asking John, that there's no conflict there. Well, yeah, it may fit in the space, but that would totally wreck what I'm trying to do. And obviously, we need the educators to weigh in on that, and we need to make sure that it's going to fit. If it doesn't fit, then the next step is there additional space on the site that won't be used, and could that be additional? I think that would be very complicated to do, because you'd have a separate, potentially a separate project or separate warrant or something down the road. But we've all talked about the fact that there could be other things that don't fit into this project because MSBA won't accept them or whatever. That may happen down the road. Maybe you get there. But really, it's preliminary at this point. We get the information, then we feed it into the options process, which is what we're going through now. And then we can come to this full committee to say, one of the options we're considering, or A, here's how that information from the town of Manchester fits into what we have. Or B, it doesn't fit into anything we have, and maybe here's another option we could consider. And then this body would get to look at those things and say, what do we think about fitting it into an option we already have, or creating a separate option? So that's how the process will unfold. Right now, we're at the step of the process where we're just trying to get some of those specifics. We already kind of know them generally from what we have. We should have some of those more specifics within a few days so that we can roll it into the PDP process. And even if some of it doesn't get totally finalized, because a lot of people need to weigh in or discuss, it can still happen really up to the end of the PSR process, so, as I understand it. So we're kind of going through those steps, and the bottom line is it will all come back to this committee to weigh in on and kind of evaluate, to your point.
So it seems like we're going to come back and talk about the education program. What about, and then in terms of the tennis, which is where it started?
Yes.
What do you got, I mean,
So for
maybe
tennis,
maybe nobody agrees with me.
no, it's really.
Can I just go back and take a quick straw poll on, so there's 1,000+ square feet currently dedicated to Manchester Youth Services, right?
We're talking about the space that's underneath.
More than that, it's like 1,800.
Okay, so is the feeling that we proceed to try to get them that space back, or that we just eliminate it from our planning altogether and have it go into an adjacent building as part of the Manchester Ask?
Well, is that a space that they really use and occupy? I mean, it holds 1,800 square feet full of stuff, or it's just a space that's been made available to them, so they happen to keep stuff down there?
We only use it in the summer.
Oh, they
It's just a
do.
summer program.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
it's only.
my
And I
impression
know
is,
as a
I
school
mean,
committee
they're
member, I had asked
basically,
what happens with the basement, and I was told it
Yeah.
wasn't being used. So now to hear
Right.
that it's being used for park and rec, I'm like, has it not been told to us?
Well,
What are you talking
so it's
I do.
separate. It's separate than the basement. It's under the
Yeah,
fifth grade
it's not
wing,
what
there's
you're
like a
thinking.
garage door.
It's a garage door.
And
Yeah.
it's, yeah,
it's a
it's like
completely undesirable space.
It's essentially
It's-
storage.
And they love it.
Yeah.
It's
But
a
they love
cement floor that turns
I
into
love
a
it, yeah.
crawl space with
Okay.
dirt.
And there's like ping pong tables
Yeah.
and stuff that happens.
Those
And I know
balls.
we're saying that this is, you know, a Manchester ask, but I've also heard that in Essex, that they're trying to, you know, reignite your youth services, so
Right.
do we keep that in mind, that, you know, they might be wanting to do that too, when when it's their turn, so, or our, you know,
Yeah,
not
and
they, us.
here's what I'm not
So-
asking to do eliminate it, I'm saying, you know, this is a design challenge.
Yeah.
And I don't
Right.
think that it's a huge reach to say, can you build a flexible space that can be used by an after-school program and then a summer program, and then it has some storage area?
Right, so
I
can
don't
the
think that
gym
that's-
have the
right?
ping pong
No.
tables in it, have
So that it
outdoor
doesn't have to be
doors
an
and be
additional
locked?
cost to the town of
Exactly.
Manchester. I think that
That's
politically,
my
we don't
point.
wanna have these
Right.
kinds of
Right.
more complications, that's where I'm coming
Right.
out on this one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we'll come to
Yeah.
this.
So
But
working it
if
into-
if the townspeople don't want to accept having space that is shared or utilized for the summer program, meaning not having what they have now, which is their own dedicated space, then it's a cost item. And somebody has to determine, I mean, to my thinking would be, that should be approved before we do the approval of the building, because
I don't think they care if they have their own, and this is just my opinion, their own I just wanna I think people just wanna make sure those programs are still
Existing.
existing
Right. They don't
and
care.
have a space.
Doesn't, could be anywhere.
Nobody
It's a
cares.
free
Right.
undesirable
Just
space
as-
right
right.
now. But in terms, my only reason I'm bringing it up for the ed program
Yeah.
is in terms of design, a space, the gym or the cafeteria, or whatever the heck it is, it has a door to the outside and can be isolated from by, you know, with chain link fence or whatever it is between
Raise
the rest of the
water.
building, in order to serve a variety of things, including the Manchester playground, which is utilized by people from all over the region, not just Manchester. So my point is really, are there things that should be in here that aren't?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just.
And that's not finished yet, is what you're saying.
Question.
And it's not
Those
education,
things
it's
aren't
not part of the
there.
education
Good
program.
It's gonna be a work in progress, I think, for many.
But maybe it's worked into the phys ed wellness space as more storage, where you can put ping pong tables and all that sort of thing.
Can I yell rabbit hole?
So it's
You can yell
flexible.
rabbit hole,
Yeah.
and I will be devil's advocate, and I will certainly go with consensus, just, we're looking at 1,800 square feet of storage of materials that aren't ours, that I do not think the district wants to assume the cost of buying and maintaining the materials, or being
And
responsible for the
insurance?
storage of them. So, there are those pieces, and then there's liability. If we take over too much of the program and it becomes a housing and a rental, so there are some operational components to this, which we can sit and go through, which because that's how we're operating out of Essex right now, which is a rental program. Storage was the first thing that came up. They wanted to bring some of their stuff in. So I don't think we need to make it an expensive proposition, but I think some segregation of the program, because it is under a separate department with its separate financing
Yeah.
and
This-
rules, regulations, and operational style,
I think,
may be something we'd want to consider.
yeah, so I said, another way to say that is, if we can keep things the way it's working now, and the program can continue to run, and it can continue to be its distinct legal entity, that's not part of our program, and it can still fit in with the space we have, and that can all work, and we know that because we've gone through the information gathering, we've fed it through the options process, and everything checks out, then I think it'll work. And I think your question is, do we need to have it in the ed program to do that? At this point, I don't believe we do, but we might, and so we need to get more information from them before we finalize that.
So that's my point of
I
clarification.
think so,
My
too.
understanding from the process has been you put it in
Sports
the
art.
ed program so it becomes an option available to us, and if we want to rule it out later, we can. But if it doesn't go in, you've got nothing to base your case on.
The ed program
visit.
justifies the space that we're,
But it doesn't tie you to having that space.
and that's why I think at this juncture, it makes the most sense to keep it included. One, there's a lot of questions, if it gets eliminated, we don't know where it goes, but to Annie's point, it's a design challenge, and so that, if we feed it into the ed program, when we start to kind of translate that into needed space, we can try to figure out how to maximize that as much as possible. And if there isn't a way where it becomes less desirable in the options we have available, it can be taken out.
Great.
Well, the only thing with that is if, we have to be realistic about it too. I'm concerned 1,800 square feet is too much, because in the end, when it comes down to budget, and you've got $300 a square foot, 1,800 square feet is a lot of money. So I think we have to think about that maybe is, right off the bat, that is dual use space now, and that it's taken into consideration right from the get-go. Otherwise, it'll go. And the problem with that, and speaking as a parent myself, my kids have all used it, and it is a big bonus for people that come to Manchester. They do like it.
Best deal in town.
So, and it's a great social thing for the town. So it's an important asset that facility has now. And we gotta be mindful of that. Because if we take it out, I think we're gonna have some problems.
Here's the other thing, it's maximizing space that we already have. I mean, we have requests in Essex for certain spaces, and it's like, the Council on Aging building is never used after noon. But it shouldn't be a sacred space. We should be maximizing the
Right.
capital costs that we've incurred.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a rabbit hole because I'm gonna add in, right now we have the auditorium as an extra space. That's gonna most likely be removed.
Mhm.
So when you have 5th grade play and basketball, there is going to be no place for Parks and Rec after school unless they're forced all into classrooms. So-
Design challenge.
Yes.
Meet the challenge. This is like a game show. I like
I
it.
think, I'm hearing, keep it in, we can take it out.
Because that must be it.
But can I just ask this, Sarah, you're on, Manchester has other building projects that they're looking at, correct? Well, I
No,
mean,
not-
because.
The master plan, I
Yeah,
think we're
master
looking
plan.
at.
Not specifically.
Not specific.
It's very, very long
It's,
term.
yeah.
Just log-on thoughts.
I just hate to have a district school housing things that, I get it, it's nice that they have it, but we've also got a program for Essex that we've got 10 more years before we're gonna be able to do anything, and that's a little bit frustrating, and I'm not so sure how it will go over.
That's why I
Well,
would
I
say
think that-
it has to be, that's why I would say, make it
Yeah.
a less complicated ask, have it be shared space, and that what you're really doing is trying to maximize your capital dollars.
Yes, I agree.
And I really think it is. But that's why you want to use the building over the summer, because you want to get the most you can out of the dollars that you've spent.
Well said, Annie.
No, seriously,
No,
I
I'm
mean,
not being, that was
I
very
just
well
think
said.
it's a
Mhm.
frugal way of
Yeah.
looking at it.
Well, it's the way the school functions now as well. So
Shared space.
hopefully we can do the same.
You wouldn't begrudge, I mean, we don't begrudge them the use of it now.
We rent it.
We rent it, so,
But, and I wouldn't look at it too carefully and specifically as 1,800 square feet of space that program requires. They happen to occupy a space that is 1,800 square feet.
Right.
Yes.
And I don't know if that includes the ledge that's supposed to climb up into the
Right.
crawl space.
Sandbox?
No, that's the clear flat area.
And that's exactly what we're gonna go through with the process to figure that out. So it's very important
Challenge
question.
accepted.
By the way, it's worth
Thank you.
discussing.
okay, onward.
What was the question?
And tennis does not need to go in the program because it's an existing
I
asset on the
think there's
site.
other opportunities to do
Okay.
tennis courts and
That's fine.
PDP than the at program.
And we're gonna get to
and
see
once
the
you
end.
And
add
then tennis and
tennis,
PE.
then why don't you add other
Yeah.
sports activities? So then again, it's going down a slippery slope.
Is it, we don't want
It could be as simple as, it's a condition of the lease that the town is expecting that will be either capped or replaced.
Well, it's not the town, it's the district's program, so it has to, that has nothing to do with the town, that's because the district needed 3 courts together to play tournaments.
I see.
I don't play tennis, obviously. But it's part of our program, so,
Gotcha.
and I never want to fight that fight again.
So let's just make it a point to add something on the agenda to circle back to this one,
Yep.
and we can report back. So the plan next time is to present some of the implications of cost to the committee, in addition to formally approving the PDP on the night of the 6th. And so we can at that time start to see some impacts, if it's separate space or combined space. That'll be the first time where you can start to model and see the impacts of that.
Great.
Facilities assessment, I believe Dan and JCJ will go over what their consultants are on board doing kind of later in the meeting, so we'll skip that for now. Budget collaboration group, I believe they've met this week, right? Or between them and the town meeting. There's
Yes,
some-
and I think the keys, we already talked about what our major conversation was, which was the senior center space and youth services, youth center, Parks and Rec.
So does
Bobby
everyone,
outlined
does
the
everyone
things.
understand what the senior center ask is?
No.
No,
Okay, so when we met in budget collaboration, we presented them with the concern we had, going back to the youth program again, over the youth program and the fact that the program is currently housed there but isn't part of our program. There has been some discussion in their master plan and questions about whether or not there would be space available, if this was an opportunity for them to develop better space for that program. So we took that question along with some back channel. We had heard about some interest in a senior center at one point. Some of the options we had looked at in terms of if you built on an alternate site and left the heart of the building on Memorial School, some of that space could be retained for town offices, possibly a senior center, youth center, and some functioning. So out of those conversations and proposal ideas, we went back and asked the budget collaboration team whether or not there was in their master planning work, their long-term planning, actual consideration, should we be factoring in any way, whether or not they wanted to have a senior center and or youth center part of the site at Memorial. They did not, and for those who were there, please jump in if I'm characterizing it inappropriately, they did not seem to have an active plan to attain that, but did ask that we run some numbers to see if it was even possible to situate on the site a senior center later on down the road, not attached to the project, and or the youth center issue. So those were the numbers that they were gonna send us. We put out the ask to them again, and hopefully we can get them to you just to see if there's even a shot that if we built in a certain way, there'd be a piece of land left for them to build on. Is that about right?
Yep.
I mean, the good news is I think we're starting with the assumption that if something, it all came from the topic, if something is a one-town use only, that is separate and distinct from something that is a joint district decision, and therefore funded, should be funded separately, and I think everyone understands that. So now we're just talking about how this fits into the process we're rolling for. So I think
Did they give any sense of size, square footage?
Nothing.
No, that was our follow-up with them.
So that, I mean, that's just,
Yeah.
And
if
But
you
the
look
first
at-
time
we'll
we worked with
lose
them,
the field, essentially a play field. That's what we'll.
Just noise.
If you look at the master plan survey, there is an attached document that has the senior center attached to town hall. So, I don't know if there's consensus on that, so.
I think to echo Avi's comment in the last go-around, it's part of the process of just knowing that this conversation is going on. It may be a blue sky conversation about things that they would like to have, but we thought, because we are doing something substantial in their town, that we should pose the question to them and give them the opportunity. And it just turned out that they would give us some basic numbers and we would see if it was even worth thinking about going forward. And if it's going to alter the best possible scenario for a school building, then it would be ruled out through our process. But I think the first question is it something that's really in development for them? And if so, what are the numbers you want us to work with? And we can tell you whether it fits or not.
But how do we not waste their time and money to go down a road that, first of all, the school committee we talked about, we haven't even agreed that this is something that we want to approve.
If ever.
It just
So-
it seems like we're going to be going down two different roads that just make no sense.
But I think it's,
I agree we have to talk about it, but
we
when
never
can we
had a
just say
formal
no?
request for it. We brought it up because we had heard it in town. We wanted to just raise the issue. And I think it's one of those things we want to button up.
Yep.
But I think that there is not, there's no, it's so theoretical. There's no numbers, there's no square footage, there's no ask.
I don't think there's any real momentum behind it right now. It's just something that some are talking about. And so therefore it doesn't have any sort of ask about it. You know,
Yeah.
There's no program, there's no size requirement.
So if there's no ask, if you get with no data, then we keep moving. This is
Yeah.
not gonna slow us down.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a big deal, and I don't think, I don't think it's a big deal for us to devote a little time to thinking about it. But I don't think it's gonna go anywhere.
Yeah, and so right now, as it relates to this project, we're not wasting any time or slowing the process that we're currently on, or taking a step back to look at that as of right now. And so the ask has been to get some numbers, square footage wise, or rough program. And so at a very high level, we can try to feed that into what it might mean impacting the sites that we're currently looking at least to pass that first test. But until we have that information, we're not taking it into consideration.
Yep.
So,
And unless it's a really small center, I think the size of the site is going to quickly
So,
Yeah.
prove that it's, would be extremely challenging to do.
And
so
our
we just
priority
move
is
on
to
and
make,
wait for them to get this
Yes.
information to us.
Yes.
and our
that's what
priority is
we
to
do.
make sure
You
that the
got it.
kids have adequate
Yep.
playgrounds, parking. We need to address the needs of this facility, and if that, if that ends up that some miraculous thing happens and some land dries up, maybe they can build something there, but I just don't. Our needs come first. That's our charge.
Yeah.
Okay?
I think the other main thing on budget collaboration is that we did get approval for the November 18th go forward. And set November 18th as the vote date for the schematic design of the cost.
18.
November 18th.
What did I say?
No, it's because we haven't hit November this year, I'm reminding everyone we're talking about next year.
But it's actually the date of November 18th.
No, it's November 2018.
In 2018.
That's right, we're not gonna meet everything.
November of 2018 for local approval.
Yes.
of
Which
the
is
design
great.
to move the project forward.
I think it's a great success, to be honest. It's very beneficial for us. It's very good that the towns are being so supportive.
It puts us on a great timeline.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you for that $1 million you're going to support.
All right, that's nice.
Did you get that, Christina?
What?
Noted. Communications working group.
named after me?
Yeah.
Anything to
Communications
note from
working
the
group.
Communications,
We
we've made some progress. Pam and
Came back this
Avi
evening.
and Caroline decided to send a postcard. I was
Annie's on
opposed,
board
but
now.
after last night's meeting, I am totally in support of that postcard. Yeah, so we have some communication going out, and we're gonna have lunch next week and talk about other things we need to do.
Very good.
Okay.
Quick budget update. We haven't signed any additional contracts since last time we met. Currently, the budget's about 89% committed, in very good shape as of right now. Unless there's any questions specifically about the budget, I'm on.
Sure you can all see that. Really.
Make it a little
It's by design.
Quick calendar look ahead. As mentioned, we had the educational visioning, second visioning session yesterday, October 23rd. The second community meeting, which is related to the postcard that will be sent out towards the end of this week. It will be held Wednesday, November 1st, both morning and afternoon sessions. And then we'll be back here on November 6th, Monday, for formal review and approval of the PDP. So that'll be the last building committee meeting in the PDP.
So that's a
before we
Monday
submit.
meeting?
That is a Monday special meeting, yep.
And what
Off
day
our
is that?
typical schedule.
6. I will send a meeting up.
Thank you.
I'll bring
Oh, you think?
Yeah, and when you do, you might want
I-
to, Christina, when you do, you might want to underline that it's Monday, even though we talked about it a while ago.
Yeah, I will for sure.
Thank you.
And then we'll be submitting PDP on November 9th, which is Thursday that same week.
And when is the mailing going out?
Mailer, well, the postcard's in process. I don't know exactly what day, but it sounds like as early as tomorrow.
So, and I'm sorry, to go back to that postcard, this is a communication just to to school parents, to,
Community wide.
Both
Manchester and
towns.
Essex.
Just a reminder.
thanks.
With that said, going to bring up JCJ's presentation and pass the baton.
Here's your matrix.
So, today's topics are updates, regular updates, a little bit about educational planning, we've been talking about, evaluation of the options, and a little bit about the PDQ course. So, project updates. Surveyor is expecting to complete their survey work, was expecting to complete their survey work today. I don't know if they might be delayed a couple days because of the weather. But essentially they're, moving towards wrapping up their efforts. Similarly, the traffic consultant was supposed to be back on site today. I don't know if they actually made it because of the weather as well.
They were actually.
Okay, but they were. So that should complete their field work for now, and we would expect to see the report in a few weeks. Similarly for the survey. As mentioned, we had the educational visioning session yesterday here. I think it was a productive meeting, at least for us. We gleaned a lot from the conversations that were happening, especially in the second half of the day. The folks here attending got into starting to actually create bubble diagrams and starting to understand the important adjacencies that the educators would recommend. So David Stevens is in the process of distilling that information and trying to make it legible, easy to read and understand. And actually one thing that I think that we haven't done is, we can do this tomorrow morning, is post the notes that he took from the first educational visioning session, which was distributed at yesterday's meeting, but I don't think it has been distributed to this committee. So we'll make sure that that gets put on Dropbox tomorrow. And talking about the educational plan, we have received the educational plan draft update last week. We started to go through it, identifying a variety of aspects, not the least of which is, what the architectural implications are of what's in there. I've highlighted a couple of items that were interesting out of it architecturally for us in terms of the elements that we'll be paying attention to, the relationships of large rooms to breakout rooms, the splitting up some level reading areas for the different grades, the science laboratories that have been discussed previously, also the desire to have a band chorus rehearsal room, larger instrumental lesson rehearsal room, the auditorium, as Pam had mentioned before, Project Adventure, pre-K, trying to go to a broader pre-K service for the community, and also the IRWL and SAIL program. I know you have a word you use for URL. That's what it is. So we'll be going through that and identifying it. Actually, the space summary templates. Many of these spaces have already been identified. These are some of the spaces that we've already identified in the present draft of the space summary template. The space summary template is actually now available, updated on the Dropbox, and we'll talk about that when we get into the PDP report. We still have a little bit of work to do to flush through the educational program, make sure that we've captured some of the things that may not have been caught before we saw the latest iteration. So we'll make sure everything is aligned and up to date between those two things.
So, can we go back a slide? Sorry.
Quick question on that one slide.
Yeah.
This just might be a nitpicky thing. Is mother's room like a real term?
Yes.
It is?
Oh, it's for nursing.
No.
You have to have it.
Really?
Yeah.
Seriously? Oh, for teachers?
Yeah.
Okay, that's different.
Teachers who are nursing, they have to have it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking of like parents, like,
No.
get that. Fine, thank you.
So can
I'm
Nursing.
full support of nursing.
I'm happy to change it to nursing room. Either way, if that's the intent.
Can we go back a slide?
Well, before we do, can I just ask about this? So we just took out showers and toilets. We got kids up till fifth grade. Why is showers and toilets back on? I mean, not the toilet part, I get that part. The shower part.
These schools usually have one.
Well, it's not a locker room per se in terms of shower toilets. It's individual use, but it's something separated would be one off of the nurse's office, I believe, and one off of the PE area. So not like a gang shower like you're used to, but just a place if something happens, an
Somebody has
accident.
an accident or something like that.
We
As
can-
happened today. You didn't have a shower.
I guess because it says gym shower. I think that if I was reading this, I did do it. I looked at it and said, we just got rid of them at both schools, why are we putting this back on here? So that was my conclusion.
Yeah, it's an individual use shower toilet.
Maybe we should label it differently.
Yeah, we can do that.
Can we talk about this slide, conference room for 50, and then the previous slide, the 450 in the auditorium, since we have a nice, beautiful auditorium here? I just want to know if we can justify those two things.
Can we just first understand, these are additions to what MSBA's space plan would allow? Is that-
Variance from the space summary.
Plan guidance.
The the
Okay.
guidelines,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, so I think it's important, this is exactly what we
Are
need.
these common variations from project to project, or?
Many of them are.
Yeah.
And so can we go back to the?
Not everything will necessarily be approved, or these are things you could still do on the district's cost if the MSBA didn't decide to, if they decided, for example, not to contribute to a separated auditorium, it's still potentially an option that the district can choose to proceed with at full cost.
So, and then these conference rooms, as far as, is this during the day while kids are there that you need, a space is needed to have a separate conference that houses 50, who's the 50 people?
Probably not 50 during the school day. Certainly more than one. We have one small conference room now.
Clarification,
Yes.
are these the blue sky items?
No, there are items that have been discussed through some of the educational planning pieces. Now, whether or not there will actually end up into the plans will be part of the process that we'll work through with
So,
the educational plans.
Quick point of clarification, there's dual tracks on the ed plan. There's the scratchy, the draft document that you have that's trying to account for the things that we do in the space that we need. And then there's the two ed visioning, which are a little bit higher level, big picture, what it could be.
There's a real ed
Discussions.
plan and a wish list.
And we're gonna try to merge where we can and pull apart where.
In
Well,
some-
and part of it too is that the 50-person conference space may
We've
very
talked
well
about
be the library.
Right.
Well,
So
that's
it
why,
doesn't-
can it be, is it a dual purpose
now-
space?
Yeah,
But it's
For
correct.
now, on the ed plan, when we look at the space template, it's called out as a separate space. And then when we are declined on getting that, then we will show how it can be accommodated in the space that they will.
But there's two declines. There's decline by MSBA, but before we go to MSBA, let's decide if we want to be strategic about those asks.
Yep.
So,
Yes.
So
do
for us,
we
it's a way-
really, does this group want to actually support the request for 50-person? I call that out as an example. Because we want to we want to be very strategic about how many space summary additions, variations we ask for. So, just looking at that particular one, it seems to me you have an auditorium, not an auditorium, you have a gym, you have a cafeteria, a cafetorium, whatever these things are, that except for at lunchtime, you could have 50-person
Right,
meetings.
right.
So, and classrooms, maybe one classroom with, or a band and chorus room, like that could be a space for 50 people meetings. So I think each of these does require both some thought.
So
And I don't
it
know,
does-
is that before the whatever this thing is?
PSR is the
PS
next one, yeah.
No, before the one.
Oh,
that-
PDP.
PDP.
So, for us right now, and I think, part of the exercise, because the educational plan is still in development, this is a way for us to keep track of the elements that are desired, and as we understand that, as Lauren said, we may need to find opportunities to multi-purpose spaces, but knowing that if we're gonna join, let's say, that 50-person conference area, that it may be joined or, overlap with some other space, but we know that we need to at least accommodate the 50 people. So whatever that other space is that we're overlap, whether it's the media center or some other solution, we're keeping track of what the desire are.
Yeah, and so I think, if I'm hearing this correctly, these are the types of things that, of course, I get very interested from a financial standpoint. And I can say personally, there's a lot of things I'm on top of. I'm a little behind on this process because some of these things I'm seeing now, maybe because I haven't done all my reading yet. But if I understand the process correctly, in terms of the steps we're going to go through, and I'd like Dr. Whittier to correct me if I'm wrong here. Right now, what we've done through the ed visioning process is to get wish list items from people in the building and people in that committee group to say, if you had your ideal school, how would it work? Those things can get incorporated into the plan. To your point, we may want some of them in or out, but I think if I understand, right now, we want a broad list. At some point when we get into design options, and, because right now we're really in very high-level options about test fit and that sort of thing. When we get into real design options down the road, then we're gonna be talking about, do we support these things? What is the impact, what is the cost of these things? Can they be co-located? If not, do we even really need those things? And all those, I guess my point is, if I understand correctly, all those conversations, I believe, are going to be happening when we move from PSR into schematic design. Because really, we're gonna exit PSR, phase 2, with a preferred option, which is a high-level option that tells us basic configuration of big spaces, does it fit at what site, and then we're gonna get into what are all the componentries. So this is a very important thing to know, because if I'm wrong, then we absolutely need to discuss it now. So I guess for D&W, is this something that we are going to go through with cost items attached in the schematic phase, or due to Sarah's point, do we need to decide now as a committee which things are in and out?
And is MSBA gonna see that list?
They won't see this list, they'll see whatever is included in the final version of the PDP space initial, but they actually call it the initial space summary template, so they
So
know
we
that there's
would
gonna be
be
wish list items in it, and then the PDP starts to resolve towards its final format with each subsequent submission.
But I think there is a certain level, or a certain expectation from the MSBA that once the ed program submitted with the PDP, that it's had a chance to be vetted somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it's not just every opportunity to just cram everything in there.
Yeah.
It's just that there's, on some level, this committee and this body's had an opportunity to review it and make sure things that are clear non-starters are taken out.
How can we do
The
that without budget
solution to how
numbers
they
though?
translate into space doesn't necessarily need to be figured out at that time, because there's many ways to solve that problem, either co-locating it or,
So
shared
without budget
space.
numbers, how can we do that? Can you help us, if we do need to scrutinize it now, how do we do that in an educated fashion?
It's been 2 days.
I missed the beginning part of that.
If we don't have numbers attached to these various items, how do we know even how to do that? Right now, your point is that MSBA expects you to vet it before you put it in the ed
To
plan.
some degree, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a dedicated conference room for 50 people is an ad.
Yeah, but
So I think the
Or
question
Meeting
is,
space, I think
Meeting
is
space.
meeting
probably how it should say. It shouldn't say
space
conference room, it should be-
that's dedicated. So that's totally dedicated as conference space and isn't
Yeah,
multi-purpose.
but, so it probably should say meeting space for 50 people as opposed to conference room.
Can we talk about if, can we talk about how we structure that, the needs for large spaces? Instead of saying conference room for 50,
Okay.
can we
Space that
say, we need large spaces that accommodate,
Yeah.
that are flexible for programming
Yeah.
that happens after school or during the summer? Flexible space that has enough room, because you saw that awful name, gymnasiatorium, whatever you call it, but a larger, do you know what I mean? Like, we think about the spaces and what we need to do in those spaces and when, so that, does that make sense?
Yeah,
Instead
I think
of, this is killing me. Like, I don't wanna see that
No.
conference room for 50 people, and I really don't wanna see a 450-person auditorium either.
Yeah, and this is why the MSBA has since changed how they ask the district and the designer to work together with the ed program, because they want the district to figure out, before they translate, before the designer has an opportunity to translate into how that fits in a box or
Yeah.
turns into spaces, it's truly what you need and how you're gonna deliver your education. And so it becomes somewhat of a design exercise, and in many different options, it can be handled different ways.
So do you keep that there, or do you say large gathering spaces that can be used in this way, this way? Is that how you approach it, or do you approach it that way? Because that, I think, is,
So, right now, the educational plan has identified certain program elements and taken an initial pass at some of how that might manifest itself architecturally. Now, whether that overlaps with a different plan or not, that's not inherent in the educational plan. And that's going to be the work that we're going to do as we move, continue to move through this process, to see whether or not, any of these particular spaces are, need to be unique, can be overlapped, adjacencies
So
and
does
so
that come
forth.
before November 9th? I mean, is that what?
No.
Okay.
Oh,
Because
good.
someone's saying it has to be submitted.
I thought that's
what
what
I thought, I
Well-
heard someone say, that we need to vet
It's
that.
understood to the MSBA, that's what I was hearing, that there are some sort of below-the-line additional space requests that may or may not fit into the final design.
I would,
I feel like we're being asked to present what the needs are. So,
In your
John-
2-day session, that's what.
yeah, and just in looking through the outline of the PDP, ed plan.
yeah.
He's gonna need a place to put 50 adult people to gather and have a productive work session. So whether it's a room all of its own, a room big enough to configure, so adult people can meet, that's an actual need. He's gonna have a 450 person population in that building, he's going to need a place to put them. He may say no to the auditorium, so we gotta make sure the gym or the cafeteria can
Right.
get 450.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think it's just a
we're
way
in
of skinning
process
the
of it.
cat. I think it's a different way of structuring the ask, and I think that this is just raw, that's all.
Yeah,
Can I ask
so
one other question?
PSR is taking some of that raw data and raw needs from the ed program, and so the options that get further developed in PSR will actually have, rather than loose kind of diagrams on the site, it's actually, here's the space requirements you need, and here's a translation of that. The 50-person conference room could be a separate space in one option, and in another could be shared space.
Right. Can I just ask about two things that seem to me to be things that should be reimbursable? The gender-neutral toilets, I thought that was like, you're supposed to have that now. And the mother's room,
Those are state
None
regulations
of,
and the state
I
should be
just want to
helping.
make sure that you understand, none of the things on this item are necessarily extra cost to the district.
oh, okay.
They may or may not be. So right now, these are identifying items that have been identified in the educational plan,
Mhm.
the latest version of the educational plan. But if the NSBA believes that the educational plan has described convincingly
Yeah,
that this is part of the method of educational delivery here for the district, that these things are needed, this is how it operates, and so you need those spaces in order to fulfill those district goals, then very likely those will be spaces that the MSBA will include within your reimbursement. It
Great.
won't be necessarily excluded cost.
Okay.
Some things very well may be, a separated auditorium probably would be, because the MSBA has made a decision that for elementary schools,
Yep.
they won't do that.
okay.
But something like a nursing room or mother's room, something as a band rehearsal room, if those are things that actually support the educational curriculum, then it's very likely they will be part of the reimbursement cost. This doesn't address whether
Yeah.
they're in or out
This is
of
not
the
saying that you
cost.
I just want to clarify with respect, only the things that are in the ed plan are the educational. Mother's room is not in the educational plan that's in front of you.
Right.
The administrative conference room, the conference room for 50 people, distributed library, it's in there, kind of. It talks about leveled libraries for the balanced literacy, the gym. So we're combining the big picture planning wish lists that were generated and conversations about space we would want with the educational plan, and everything's getting lumped together, which is part of why, I'll be quite frank, the ed plan writing process has been a little slow, because we're trying to figure out what exactly we're anchoring to. So what we've tried to capture in the document is the academic program and any space implications, with some brief summaries of how we do business. But I don't think we got much into how people work. But we did get into how adult people work together, and how we want to configure space to facilitate that in some of the big picture planning. So we've got a couple of things blending together, which is making it a little, I think, confusing.
And just so
process.
you hear from, that when you throw this up there, you're gonna have a lot of opinions, and it's not, I hope it's not, we're not trying to.
Well,
No, I think we're trying to make sense of how to best
if there
go
was a
about doing
couple of
this.
bullets that helped me to explain that, okay, that 50 is, would be after school hours, so that you could look at it and go, oh, okay, well, it can be used, it can be in dual space somewhere. Or the additional 3 classrooms. It was a school that was up till 8th grade, so now why are you putting 3, but, no, I'm just saying, you have reasons, so if you had a couple of bullets saying maybe the pre-K.
But I don't have reasons. Part of this too is just what doesn't
It
fit in them. wasn't found in the original assessment of the space. So I think it's a lot of things all together,
Yeah.
because you did a whole space assessment of like what exists now versus what the MSBA says by square footage. So by square footage, it came up with less classrooms than we currently
Right,
have.
okay.
So we have to put those classrooms back, because otherwise
is it-
we'd have to pump up class size. So there's just a lot of detail behind all of these,
Yeah.
which
The
is
best-
making people very nervous, I think, to see the final bullets.
Yeah, and I think the best way that I
No, we're
can
not.
describe this is that we're trying to tease out an understanding of what is going to be different about this building from the guidelines.
Okay.
So, and again, some of these things are rooted directly into the curriculum, and some of them are maybe wish list items or things that are high priorities, but still not necessarily directly related to, you know, a mother's room is not necessarily connected to the educational curriculum. But it makes a lot of sense. It's the same thing as a gender neutral bathroom. Now, my experience with the MSBA is I highly doubt that they're going to turn you down on gender neutral bathrooms or mother's room. But, you know,
Okay, so we could go on and on about this, but I want to make
Can
it
you use the
8:05.
prior slide?
Yeah. Get
What's
some
that?
feedback
Can
on
you
that.
just show the prior slide? What is the difference between these two slides?
The first two?
well, these are items that I've taken directly out of the educational plan. This one and the one preceding it. These were items that were specifically identified in the educational plan. And this last one are some overlap, things that were in the educational plan and also part of the discussions that have been going on regarding, you know, what might be in this building.
Okay, so to summarize, the question that I heard asked is, should we just, what should this committee do? Should they just keep moving on, or do they need to discuss these things?
So our expectation is that as part of the process of finalizing the educational plan, from there, we'll tease out those things that will alter the space summary template.
So you're saying it's okay for them to be in now, we'll deal with it after the PDP is submitted, or before, is my question?
Well, I think there's, that, you know, Pam and John and whoever else is working on developing the educational plan probably want to take an initial pass at what are the things that, the elements that are high priority. But as far as, this isn't going to be the, you know, what's submitted here for PDP won't be the final space summary, and there will be adjustments. Where you'll get to the final space summary really will be at the end of schematic design. That's the one that's going to set your building and set your reimbursement and its variations from there that are, you know, the MSBA will be much more diligent about calling out, you know, other, you know, things that get added late after schematic
So I think the answer is after this phase.
Okay, great.
And, but, you know, to Sarah's point, I think the committee is looking for us to identify if somebody asks for a volleyball 45-foot high gym. And if there's a flagrant foul that adds money in square foot or whatever to the building.
And you
that's-
have one on this list, we've already identified, the conference room for 50 and band and chorus rehearsal.
Unless it's in the library.
As,
Well, yes,
it
it's
seems
not
to me
written
to
right.
be.
Correct,
It's not
correct.
me.
I get it.
You know,
Meeting space.
I
So
get what
like,
you're
that's
saying.
the thing that like, you know, 50-person conference room, that's a dedicated room, which is how this reads,
Yes.
is however many dollars per square foot. And that's where I'm reacting, is like, and I see two big spaces.
And you're thinking square foot.
And I'm thinking square foot,
11
and
parts
I'm
a square
thinking,
foot.
and
I
I
get it.
think with all due respect, the committee has a responsibility to keep the wish list in check. That's really the big picture. You know, we want to hear it, but at some point, we're gonna have to say to the wish list, we're not there, you know, that would be nice, but the answer is gonna be yes or no.
So I think we're not there yet, and I just think that these slides for
They're
us
confusing.
and for the public especially,
Yeah,
if this goes up, is just really confusing from my own perspective.
I would agree.
So I just think for future, like, I'm still a little bit confused, I'm just worried about.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
see the
these
whole
things
space
just
summary.
came up yesterday that haven't really been,
Space list.
Yeah,
like Mother's Room came up toward the end of our discussion yesterday,
Yeah.
for the first time.
Well, we talked about
It did.
it at our
It
last
was
meeting
on,
here.
it was on the
Yeah.
presentation on Friday when I looked at it.
There are some that I'm not sure, like I'm not sure where the gym shower and toilet came from. If there's a nurse.
So you guys are gonna, so the process going forward is that you guys are gonna review this and whittle it down.
We're working off the sheet that Sarah has in front of her.
Could we also not have some kind of additional table or at least a qualifier whether certain spaces can be shared or
Yes.
multi-purpose spaces?
Sure.
So that you can at least start to identify that there's overlapping
Yeah.
square
Needs,
footage.
yeah,
That's a good idea.
yeah.
Yeah, I also guess that, it's just my thought, but I'm now sort of thinking, we're gonna submit this thing and you're gonna want us to vote on it. So I really wanna read it, I really wanna see it soon, so that these kinds of things, because I think that there are two audiences, there's MSBA, and I have no doubt that whatever you put forward will meet their requirements. But then there's the things, there are some triggers that will trigger voter reactions, and people will glom onto, and I think we need to do our best to do that and make sure that we're being thoughtful.
That we're not creating.
That we're being thoughtful.
Active.
So the extent that we can get it sooner, and that you can anticipate that we'll have comments.
They'll start telling everybody. You know what I mean? That's-
Yeah.
They find a reason.
So the next item, just as a reminder, we will be having a community meeting before the next meeting of this committee, community meeting number 2. This is the basic agenda for that meeting. Like we did last time, I think the expectation here for us, and please correct us if I'm wrong, is that we'll have another working group meeting leading up to prepare this. I think the big question for us is making sure that the committee is on board in terms of how site selection and options are discussed in this community meeting. And again, whether that's a conversation here tonight or with a subgroup prior to the meeting on November 1st, we'll look to you for that.
Did we already vote on the site?
Yeah.
We're bringing people up to date on the work that is being done, so they are aware of what's happening. So then when 6 months from now, we have a vote, or 9 months from now
This is
on
the
a project, they
agenda for the
understand
community meeting.
how we got to this process.
I understand, but it's not a potential site, this is the site,
Right.
it's the site we decided on.
So it's
Well,
not
no,
like
but
we're
it's all,
Potential's
no,
the wrong word.
yeah, no, the reason it says potential is because it's
Right.
going to go through the
Considered
potential
site.
site, considered sites.
These sites were
not
considered
future
and we
potential-
voted.
Considered.
That's a better word,
Considered
considered
site.
sites, maybe we can.
Yeah, considered
Yes.
sites.
Past tense.
So can we pick a time maybe on Friday for whomever the subgroup may want to be to look at that slide that is going to be sent out, so we can go through that?
Yeah, yeah.
We had a small breakout group.
Yeah, we did that last time, it
Last
worked
time
pretty
around.
well, I think. Needless to say, all slides need to be reviewed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have
It's the
a,
same group as before.
What about
We'll have a phone
options?
conference
Are we gonna talk
tomorrow
about
at-
that now?
Yes.
one, I believe, right?
Yes, we are. That's what we're
Before the
supposed to do.
slide generation happens, we'll have a discussion about.
No, no, always don't be. They're fit.
If we could do, were we talking about Friday or not?
No, we can do that offline after and not hold everybody up for 4 people.
That's
And then-
really
and then
not selfish of you.
There's a
Okay.
1 o'clock pre-prep, pre-discussion, before slides are generated, discussion tomorrow. So we'll loop everybody in on
Okay,
that.
thank you. Great.
Okay. So evaluation of the options. Big picture. In the MSBA's guidelines for the BDP requirements, it starts off, the purpose of the preliminary, for reading this out, preliminary design program is to define the programmatic, functional, spatial, and environmental requirements of the educational facility necessary to meet the district's educational program, and perform a review and investigation required to clearly define the existing building deficiencies.
I know.
So from that, that's sort of the basic preamble for this PDP report. What we're trying to identify are the project requirements for the programmatic project requirements, functional, spatial, environmental, and to define the existing building deficiencies. Through this process, as just to make sure you understand we've actually covered a lot of ground since we've begun this process. We've developed the programmatic requirements as developed through the educational plan. It's been developed by the district and still in progress, but expected to be done in time for the PDP submission. The 2 educational visioning sessions that we've had that will feed into that educational plan. And the space summary template will describe some of those programmatic requirements and provide square footage for that. The functional requirements is as defined by the MSBA in the district. This is going to be a school. It's a pre-K through 5 school. There's still probably an open question in terms of what the pre-K count will be, but per the educational plan, I know the goal would be to expand that program. And enrollment and grade configuration, as I said, it's all been set already by the MSBA. Spatial requirements, the educational visioning sessions help to start to understand some of the desired adjacencies, desired characteristics of some of these spaces. The educational plan supports that as well in parallel. And then, of course, site selection and understanding site opportunities is probably one of the most direct ways to understand how we're going to deal with the sort of the spatial requirements of the building. We know the building fit on certain sites and not others. There were some pluses or minuses at each of the different options as well, and that's part of the discussion we have. The environmental requirements of the project is we've gone through the exercise of understanding the opportunities and limitations for the different sites and for the different options. Geotechnical report, phase 1 assessment report, and site survey will all help to describe some of these environmental aspects of the project. And finally, defining the existing building's deficiencies, which is something that has been done through the existing conditions report, which is will be part of the PDP and has already been submitted for your review. So that's sort of the big picture. We've actually done a fair amount of work towards this effort. And part of that next is considering the options. As you know, the MSBA requires us to look at renovation only, addition renovation options, and new construction options. From through this process with the building committee, what we feel that has been uncovered is that that there's variance on the addition renovation and the new construction. We've shown options for addition renovations that have a very minimal additions to the building, just enough to get some of the educational goals included in a nearly existing building, reno-only style improvement to the building, as well as more significant options that remove all the classroom wings, keeps the core. For new construction, again, 2 variants. One is options that showed the possibility of constructing a new building through a phased construction with students on site, and then some options that would require the students to be moved off the site.
Why did you list that only as phased? It makes sense to me that, well, I think that it made sense to most people with that piano, that you have that as phased. Why does that have to be phased?
Well, any of the
I mean, it makes sense. That's a wonderful site, especially when you're shrinking it down to a multi-story building. If you just take everything down, clear it out, clean site, put the students somewhere else for a year, you can build it a year easily. Why? I don't understand why you listed it as phased.
Phased only, right.
So,
But
It could be,
his
it
slide does
could be in the
say,
next bucket too.
could be either.
so for anything that's
Doesn't say
phased,
here.
it could also be single. Anything that's multi-phase can easily be single phase if you move the students off site, but not every single phase option would allow students to be on site. I think that's the way to consider that. So one thing that, and to that point, I just want to clarify from the matrix that you had looked before, options N3 and N4, we had initially indicated that those would be options that would require the students to be off-site, and in fact, we took a little further look at it again, and there is the opportunity for those options to be constructed as multi-phase, student-occupied project, students on the site projects. So this demonstrates N3. You would replace all the classrooms with modulars on site, demo those, construct the new building, and then complete the rest of the site once the new building was in place. Same thing for option N4. Similarly, remove the classroom wings, construct the new building, and then come to your final configuration. So that just alters the matrix that you have just a little bit. It includes N3 and N4 into that new construction phase student stay on site category.
Can I ask a question about the weight of phasing in the decisions here? So, and I wonder about how it plays out in what we present to in the PDP. And I'm wondering if anyone else is following where I'm going with this, because what's the amount of weight the phasing should have against
Depends
the
if there are
design?
any other options.
Pardon?
It depends if there are any other options.
Yeah, but if there are other options, then I think it's like, then everything from N1 over. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's what you're saying.
Right.
I just wonder how much weight it had here in bumping up some, or
Well, I
lowering
think
some.
you have to look at it with a cost. I mean,
Yeah, it's a cost impact.
yeah, it's a cost
Okay.
impact. I mean, that's,
So is that, okay.
and that's what I'm looking at all of these,
Well,
with an eye toward
it's not
cost.
just cost, there's subjective opinions as well. You know, I mean, I could be against a phased approach because I think 50 years of the school in a different space is going to outweigh the phased consideration.
Right.
So I think that's where
What?
A person could be.
each of
So
us
wait-
has
I
a
didn't
slightly
understand
different,
that.
Where you're situating the building.
each of us may have a slightly different approach to whether a phasing is important within that particular scheme or not.
Because of where it's going to be located.
Yes.
I see.
So if this, like the piano is further back on the site because and
Right.
you're
Because you
doing
have
that
the
because of the phased
Right.
option.
You don't have to.
But you could move that
It
whole
could be
building
it can be
forward.
moved a little bit, sure.
Right.
Yes.
But it's still, it's a building, it's a building.
But the cost does,
Yeah, sure, cost is
Right.
part of it.
And
Thank you.
safety for the kids.
right.
So with that in mind, since cost is so important, I think one of the most important things we need to do to organize tonight's discussion, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to think about what we're trying to accomplish. We need to submit a PDP with some options. It needs to have those minimum items we have. We need a renovation, it has to be in there. An addition with the renovation has to
So
be
we
in
don't
there.
need to have to talk
And
about
the-
R1.
No.
Right.
Correct, R1, it's gotta be in there whether we like it or not, and we may quickly dispose of it after the PDP phase. So to that point, there's a lot of options in here, including ones we may not like. What we really need to do is make sure that rather than ranking the ones that we like the most or why, if there are any things that are non-starters in here that we have the option to exclude, so not R1, maybe one of the add-ons or maybe any of the new constructions. That's kind of what we need to discuss. And even if we do that, right now, because we don't have all the cost information in hand, we have to keep in mind that down the road, as we start to get that information, it might bring something back, an idea that we rejected could come back. So really for tonight, to narrow this, we just need to say, are there any things in these options that are big problems for us? Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely correct. There's no upside really to take anything off unless it's a polarizing absolute non-starter, okay? So that's my stance on this particular slide. Regarding the cost piece of it, the big thing about phasing, or more specifically swing space, that's always a huge factor, because if we're entertaining modulars for 20 classrooms, we ran some numbers and we got an order of magnitude of, $3 million. And so when you start thinking about $3 million for 20 modulars and all this and that, your evaluation becomes very different, because that's all non-reimbursable. And then, so when you're looking at options, you say, okay, well, this scheme allows us to only have 4 modulars and save a considerable amount of money. Obviously, that all plays in, and so my expectation is that slide is gonna have square footage and numbers on it when you see it next time, that will include modular costs
Next
So-
time.
when we vote
Okay.
on
So-
November 6th.
So let's,
How many square feet did you look at in modular?
So we need to take, there's so many variables right now that it's almost impossible to nail down the square footage just because of the previous discussion we had with the ed program, okay? If you plug in the number of students we have into the MSBA space summary, it spits out a number. Then we need to take an educated guess at any additional square feet and identify that, and then put a cost to it based on new or rented. Okay, those are unit prices. This is all high-level stuff. We're not going to be locked into anything, but that's what we typically put in with a PDP.
And again, just to re-emphasize what Avi was saying, we're not, the goal tonight is not necessarily to pick any winners, and whether all these 11 options move on. In some ways, the thing to remember is that these options, these schemes that we've developed are hints of what a building could be. They aren't a building design per se. And at the same time, what we're really looking for, JCJ is really looking for, is to see whether or not any of these options are non-starters, whether anything is sacrosanct. So tennis courts, for example.
that's where we want to go right now.
The 3 that would require moving the tennis court, they can all go.
Off the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Off the table.
Is that a motion?
Completely?
I move that the 3
Now,
options.
Second.
now, hold on.
I think we need to talk
Second.
about it a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
Well, we will just,
So you can make the
Make a
motion
motion.
and then talk about it in the
Second.
motion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the tennis
So wait,
courts is,
you
it's
get the
actually
motion in a
a
second?
really good.
Yeah, who said that?
Lisa motion, George second.
And it's AR3, N6, and N7.
AR3, N6, and N7 have tennis courts.
Don't have
Used.
tennis.
Don't have
Have tennis
tennis
court
anywhere.
space being used.
So you
correct.
made the motion,
They have
make
tennis
the
courts anywhere.
case.
Correct.
Aside from those facts, that the tennis courts being removed, I don't think that there's a significant advantage offered by those schemes that isn't found in other options. And so if we have an option that issue aside is better, I wouldn't bother entertaining an option that doesn't provide the same qualities and removes the tennis courts. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
Well-
when I scored those 3 options among, like when I looked at AR2 and AR3, I gave AR2 higher score and the same between N2 to N7, N6 and 7 got the lowest scores, and that isn't just because of the tennis courts, there were other drivers in that. So when you couple that with the lack of the tennis court or using the tennis court space, that to me sort of threw it out.
Yeah, just in discussion after the motion's been made about the pruning and selections into the PDP report. As an outsider, not knowing any of the history, I mean, we're up to speed a little bit on the history of the tennis courts now, but as an outsider looking in the tennis courts, it would almost be irresponsible to look at eliminating them or reconfiguring them to some degree, because to Avi's point, we may come to a point where there's cost information that completely offsets the political rabbit hole of the tennis courts. Now, I think the general consensus is that would have to be pretty high to get to that point to offset the political, just the political discussion and everything that's happened to date to put the tennis courts where they are. But I think it's our responsibility to at least keep it on the table that once we have the cost information, to present that to the committee.
So can I just speak to, I lived tennis courts for 8 years.
Yeah.
There's a couple things. One is political. The second is it's close to the well, so environmental. We were sued that it was an environmental problem. So environmentally, it doesn't make sense. Third, we've done alternative analysis. You've got to have tennis, going back to ed program, as for the district, the tennis courts are part of the district's program. And we've been to court, whether you agree with it or not, the taxpayers have been to court, basically DEP court, to say there are no other alternatives. So unless there's an alternative on this site, I think we look really stupid. So, and we've already litigated
Litigated, yeah.
and appealed and all of that to say there's no other alternative. You can put them at Sweeney Park and all the other places.
But you
So-
didn't have a project at that time that was necessarily considering the whole site and what
So
might be happening.
if somebody can make a case, to Avi's point, that you should do something at this tennis court site and put the court someplace else on the Memorial School site in terms of the being open to options. I can't imagine it's gonna bear out, but I think that's responsible. I don't think, though, I think we have to recognize that the tennis courts are part of the district program, and any of your options that don't include a tennis court, 3 tennis courts, somewhere in them, then that's not, doesn't make sense. And that's why I go back to the ed program.
So, but in the tennis courts, they're more the program of the high school, correct? Because my concern is if we move them, I don't want them on the backside of an elementary school. I'd rather them closer to the high school. Who's using it, one, and who, the high school kids don't have to be traipsing through the middle of the elementary school situation.
And we already bought them.
Well, and they're under 12 years old, that's the other part.
If you're gonna keep them on the site, moving them is just an expense that you could spend on the building.
Well, we don't know enough about what's going to happen with the design to really
Right.
make an intelligent decision that it does or doesn't make sense to consider the tennis court location.
So why
in some
couldn't
way.
we, so if that's the case, and if we have flexibility after PDP to bring in new information, why wouldn't we consider getting rid of them now and knowing as a committee that if new information that is specific and enumerated with an alternative of where they would go and all those things, pros and cons are listed, then we can revisit it. But right now, we don't have any of those things.
I agree with you, because I think and I know where you're kind of going with all that, I think if we present this now, it's just gonna be a political firestorm. So just knowing that it can come back, I think we should flat on the way you're saying.
Remco, you wanted to?
Well, one of the issues is that if we throw away N6 and 2 of the other ones,
N6, N7, AR3.
there are a lot of merits to those plans that were thrown away. And so I think that, for instance, N6, you keep the tennis courts and you just move the building over. And that's what I'm concerned about. I don't want to throw away the merits of these schemes just because there are no tennis
But
courts.
here's a question for you. Does that, when you say N6 design, is that the only way N6 design is going to fit on the site, is if you got rid of?
I don't think so.
So that's, I guess that's the question.
Right, and that's where we have, you know, that's where it's difficult making some of these decisions, I think.
So would a compromise be to say, if you have something that you like about N6, N7, or AR3 that is separate of the tennis courts, please let us know what it is so we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we can still get rid of the bathwater.
But look at,
Just pull the plug.
AR3 and N4 are basically the same thing. One has a curve and one doesn't, right?
Not really.
Oh,
There's a lot of difference there.
Yeah, and that's where we need your input.
details.
So,
No, there's a difference in light, there's a different way that they're using the courtyard, there's all kinds of,
Has a different presence on the
the
site.
way they're dealing with the site.
But
why
with
they're
these
on-
pictures,
I know.
do we have that detail? I'm just a little bit confused how we could have that detail with these pictures, because looking at it, not being in the industry, look about the same to me, I don't
yeah,
understand.
well, that's why he's saying,
That's why they're here.
that's why we need Remco to weigh in.
So one thing again, I'd like to just reiterate, these schemes that we've developed, we're trying to find possible ways to solve this problem on the site. And what the ultimate final solution will be may likely not look exactly like any of these options. Maybe an amalgamation of some elements, or maybe a variant. We might take the scheme N6, and to that point, that might be a preferred building layout based on what comes out of the educational plan and the visioning sessions and just the preference of the committee. Or maybe that building shifts, you know, some of the site relationships would change. You wouldn't necessarily be able to have parking in the rear perhaps, or so forth, but we're just essentially trying to
Well, the only.
flesh out some opportunities.
And I'm glad you're saying that, because I think that's the way it should go. It's just that this chart has forced everyone to consider these options based on these qualifications, so, the criteria. And so we've already done our first pass. You know, I just want to make sure that, I want to keep the tennis courts as well, but that we keep keep our mind open with regards to some of the other.
And it's very, what you will probably see coming in the PSR phase is probably some additional options that are either some of these options might go into further refinement. Some of these will probably drop off right early on in the PSR phase. Others might get a little further refinement with some adjustments. And you might see some new option or two based on an amalgamation of ideas that have come from different
How are
options.
you going to distill this info to the PSR phase options? How does that?
So what will
if we
what will
take-
happen is, you know, as we get more information, including cost information, logistics, and so forth, we will go through an exercise with you to start to essentially to continue to eliminate options towards and to understand what are the priorities that the final option will want to have. And that's going to be part of the hard work of the PSR phase as we start to distill towards a preference.
Can I ask a question about PDP?
Sure.
What's at stake if we include all of these in the PDP, and what
There's
is there?
nothing at stake.
There's a lot at stake.
The only thing that's at stake is gonna be that we're gonna end up presenting this to the community.
Yes.
Yeah. That.
So,
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah,
nowhere,
do not,
and
Yeah,
so
you know.
maybe
I
part,
agree with-
maybe part of the community discussion is explaining the process and explaining
that's
that
why
we're
we
not
voted.
locked into any of these ideas, and more often than not, the final solution is not one that's on the PDP. It ends up being a hybrid
Mhm.
of multiple pieces, and so, sorry, did you have a question?
So I'm not an architect, so it seems to me there are two things we're talking about here. We're talking about where on the property we put the mass. And then what the various spaces are and adjacencies once we locate it. Because to Remco's point, if there are adjacencies in this that you can put it where the piano is, if that's what we come up with. But it seems to me that we're talking, that we've married two things. One is where on the site, or maybe three things. Where on the site, how dense the building is. And then you start getting into the design elements. And it seems that the tennis court discussion is about where on the site is off limits. And, and then I guess then the last thing you said is in the next time we meet, you're gonna have put some big broad numbers on things. So again, back to the motion that's on the table, if you have three options that don't have the tennis courts, your budget better have a tennis court option for the district and the public. So, and I'm, unless it's on that site, I can.
So why would we just edit these? I don't understand why, like, this design here was created, and we talked about the ability to shift it back.
Right.
Why can't we as a group say that the three options need to be edited and preserve the tennis courts? Because if there's anybody that doesn't agree with the tennis courts.
I disagree.
You do, okay.
I do.
I would
I
disagree.
just, even if it's only an exercise, and I get the sensitivity of it, I do, but I think we have to consider the site, which includes the circulation around the building and drop-off and buses and the school itself and the way the property, you know, slopes, butters, all those things, you know, the committee votes the way it votes, but I just think it's important to consider all of that.
But,
And,
so what about the political implications of trotting this out?
It's gonna be a fight no matter what, I think.
But, you know, similar to how we talked about at the first
I
public
agree about
meeting
that.
about the sites, we all thought that that was gonna be a lightning rod.
Yeah.
And we discussed that, you know, as part of the process, we have to look at all these things, and we don't necessarily agree with some of these things, but it's part of the process. We do not want to move the tennis courts, but it's part of the process, and so it's part of the explanation. And so, from the MSBA perspective, no upside in eliminating anything at this point. from a public and political, you have to think about November 1st.
And so the only thing I didn't hear answered then is, to Remco's point, and to Sarah's point about conflating multiple different decisions, if you're a person at this table who likes certain things in N6, whichever was, N7 and AR3, but you don't want the tennis courts to be touched, what do you do tonight? What do we say? Do we say strike them? Do you say preserve these ideas? Do you write down a note and send it to the design subcommittee for later consideration? Can you just explain to the group here what their choices are so they know how to move forward?
I think what we would do is we'd keep the options here, take the information in terms of people's comments regarding, we like N7, but we think it should be over on this side of the site, and that's something we would develop further into the next phase as we start, again, honing towards those preferences.
So the only follow comment I want to make is that if we do, this is just a suggestion for the group, if we decide that we don't want any option, so that we're willing to review options that go on the tennis courts, but as a group we vote that we don't want to move forward with them, then we need to articulate why. It needs to be documented in our work and in our minutes, so that when people later come back and say that's perfectly good space, we could say it was for reason 1, 2, and 3.
And all of that will also be in the PDP.
Great.
So Remco, if you said, if this vote goes to not taking in, Andy, not going with the ones that have removed the tennis, because you like the design. My understanding is that those design options are still possible on the
Yes.
on the site,
Yeah.
you know, and
Other options.
are you comfortable with that? Is it the design that's, or is it the Andy argument, which is we want to be able to see what fits on the entire site so that we can, and we don't have enough information about cost?
Well, I think that the scale of these are a little, this is where I was running up against. I could see, you know, I've got page N, or option N4 in front of me.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, you know, if the site gets too constrained there for this layout, we just stack another story on. So the issue I've got is that we're making decisions, we're throwing out a bunch, but there are many different qualities in each one that could be reconfigured. I feel as long as we say that we're keeping an open mind.
Yeah, I think in context of all the new options, I think the biggest takeaway is that in the process of looking at sites and looking at new options on the current site is that you have options. You know,
Yes.
and so
That's a good point.
we're acknowledging that there's very likely going to be a combination of a lot of the really good attributes that all the new options have, and in some configuration. We don't know what that is yet, but I would encourage you to think of new option on the current site is a possibility. We just don't know a lot of the details yet. In some cases, depending on the site, that's not even a possibility. And so if we're thinking in broad terms and broad strokes, I think it's important to remember that regardless if you eliminate any of these for any particular reason, that we're still looking at the existing site and a new building in some configuration.
Can I hear from Gordon?
The teacher is called upon you.
No, it's just, you sometimes, or many times, like, bring it all together.
So Andy and I actually walked the site yesterday with these drawings and tried to visualize if we laid this on there and took a look at the school, what would it be? What would the two-story element be? How the site would work? How the traffic pattern would work? And so the perspective I came away with is really 3 main components here. First off, the transportation, how we get into the site and get out of the site, and whether we continue to keep the same transportation pattern as we have, or we decide to engage the traffic into the site by moving the school closer to where the tennis courts are. So as much as I agree with you, Sarah, I lived those fights with you, but not nearly to the level you did here. Moving towards the roadway frees up much more of the site and makes it more viable and more engaging to the site here. So transportation became a key thing to me. Do I want to bring in the traffic around the site, or do I want to keep it over all on here? And effectively, that's a big limiting factor as to where the building is actually placed on the site. The second component was one I was going to ask Pam before, whether we have this pod configuration, which is showing up on 1, 2, maybe three of these options here. Pod configurations, meaning you have a center Main Street and the classrooms off it, or whether you just have a large mass building. Is a different approach, and it affects how you actually conduct your educational program. I don't know which one of those would be better for you before I can actually make an informed decision as to which one of these configuration actually works. I found some I didn't like. I don't particularly like the ones where they're spread out and walking around a courtyard area. I was more inclined to like the ones with the pod configuration or the mass configuration, like AR2 and I forget which other one here.
N1.
But the transportation, and then finally, the engaging of the fields to the new fields that we're building on our site, and how that engages the existing fields that we already currently have too. You know, what is actually best from an education standpoint? I think we can all gauge whether we got a 2-story building and whether we got more roof area or more wall surface or more fenestration, or all that stuff is the practical consideration. But I was just trying to think how I bring my traffic in, how I access onto Summer Street, how I get to 127, how I do all that stuff, and what that meant to me, whether it's better to keep a similar traffic pattern as we currently have, or whether it's actually start something new, like if you look at N6 and see what that does, bringing it all the way in, or N7, they all have different effects. So I came away with no real opinion of which one.
Which is perfect for the PDP.
Exactly. Honestly, I didn't want to make a decision based on something I see. I know full well what you guys are going through. This is just blobs on paper. They're really not a design in any shape. And I know that whatever we decide here, that the ultimate result is going to be something very different than all of these 9, 10, 11, 12 altogether. But there are some basic components. If we decide that the transportation pattern stays the same, the tennis court stays the same, that limits a whole bunch of items right off the bat. And then as far as the building configuration, as far as the best configuration for the education program, then plays a major part in how the building now sits on the site and the related playing fields to it. So I think we're at the early stage.
To go to your point, in some respects, this is really your decision point, not even the schemes. The schemes are here to help sort of try to figure out what are the fatal flaws, what are your red lines, but really this is your decision point here. So do you want, to continue to pursue an ad reno version that has very minimal additions to it? His swing space is still on the table, so we think that it's probably still, until that door closes, we still create options that allows for options there. So
Swing space meaning an occupied site?
Right, so that you can get the students off the site, however that's done, whether it's in a building or in a modules out in Essex or wherever, whatever it is, they're just off the site. So, in great part, this is the decision point right here. You're forced to do renovation only, although I think the impression I have, probably may be wrong, but is that there's no strong interests right now for a reno-only effort, for all the efforts that's going through. But we have it here, as the MSBA requires. Maybe similarly, the ad reno with only a minimal intervention of additions is maybe not something that is worth spending too much more time on. And then maybe these other 3 options are still on as long as swing space is still on the table as a possibility.
And so these 5 categories, it's a perfect segue into kind of getting into cost information, because between these 5 options, there's big enough differentiators to put cost to those, the difference of cost between all of these. So the difference between the 5 options on the screen of kind of categories or types versus all of the options in the score sheet. The options on the score sheet, we don't know enough information to differentiate any of the N options from each other.
You mean
Yes,
from,
we do.
just from like a dollar per square foot perspective?
Exactly.
You know, plus or minus 20%?
So we know there's a different cost per square foot for renovation space versus new space,
Yeah.
site work,
So,
utility work,
but
swing space.
But the ones to eliminate the tennis courts have an additional cost of putting tennis courts somewhere, and I would argue somewhere on this site, so if you can make N5 and N6 and the other one have tennis courts someplace on the site, then, and
It's viable.
then at least I buy Andy's argument. Absent that, I don't buy your argument, because we have tennis as part of the district program, which is why I wanted to put it in the ed program, so that it's part of what we must do. And that's my objection. So you need to put $1 million, or whatever it is, in to
Building, site, and swing space.
Can
Right.
Lisa's held her hand up for a while.
So
About
she,
three numbers.
with respect to all the
Site.
work that's gone before in the fight for the tennis court, if you're looking at the district ed program, to put tennis courts above the development of a K-5 school in priority.
Get the K-5 school.
Well, I get where you're going, but I think I think I'm on the same page with Andy. I think you need to leave all options on the table, because what we're doing now is looking at the best possible situation for the development of the elementary school. Eventually, it'll probably be phased out because of feedback that we get in the community, but if you just look at the site and say, we're gonna build a site that prioritizes the tennis court over the best possible, most cost-effective building that suits the ed program, I have a little bit of a concern with that from an educational point of view, and I don't know that I want to be going out and saying my educational priority is the tennis court over the development of the K-5, pre-K-5 building. I have concerns with that. On the educational side, I understand the political arguments.
Yeah.
But I don't know that if, I would never prioritize a program, an athletics program over the academic building.
So Lisa wants to,
It-
Lisa has had her hand up.
But there are legitimately other ways to address it.
What? Like, what are they?
We don't know yet.
Well, we don't know, like, the
But it
modulars
has
could
to
be
be
$3 to
on
$5
this
million,
site.
I
right?
don't disagree.
So,
Yeah.
and that's
So
not
we
It has to
know
be
it.
on that site.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying, is we
Yeah.
need, you have N5 and N6 without any tennis, and that is political suicide. So put them on the site someplace and put a line item to relocate them. Okay, then I'll buy Andy's argument.
I don't even buy that personally, which is different from Pam, because
But-
I think even moving them gets rid of all the legal things and all the work that has been done until this point.
Just
And all
won't
the
get a
litigation.
school.
It's not about,
You won't
to
get the
me,
school.
I don't feel
Right.
it's putting it above the other one. I think
No.
it's more to say, we've done a lot of research in the form of
Right.
legal expenses and.
I'm more comfortable with that argument than saying the educational program prioritizes tennis courts over
I
development of.
I don't
But
think
I don't
that's
think
what
it's-
nobody's
Yeah, I
saying.
don't think they're saying that.
That wasn't
Well-
the gist of my motion. The gist of my motion was that there are enough options that I've seen
Yeah.
here that provide a lot of flexibility and a lot of options still with the tennis courts in place. And to move the tennis courts, it's gonna end up a site cost, MSBA is not gonna contribute anything to us, and we're gonna pay $1 million or whatever to move the tennis courts, when I think that, in what I was looking at in the patterns and the massing and that, and the other options is that there are plenty of good options that don't involve moving tennis courts. That was
Got it.
where I was going.
Yeah.
While I'm still speaking, I just want to add a little footnote to what Gordon had to say, and it was a category that I added on my spreadsheet that I used to evaluate these, and that was the relationship between school and playing fields and parking lot and roadways, just to keep kids. I didn't like the options where playing fields were on the other side of a parking lot from the schools. I like that parking and roadways were remote and that the school and the playing fields were contiguous. So that I actually scored, I made up my own category and scored.
Which would mean that you have
So-
a preference for leaving keeping the school deeper into the site
Yes.
and leaving the tennis courts as is, and keeping the relationship with the fields as tight as it
So can you,
is, versus the
so
other way.
given
That's not an
what,
advantage to that, just from a safety point of view.
so what, given what Gordon is saying and Andy about bringing traffic in, you know, the only two scenarios I see here that have that, and maybe I'm wrong, Gordon, are 6 and 7. But
Five
Yeah.
brings it into, 6 does, 7 does, yes.
So,
And 1 does.
So Mike, Dan, Steve, is there any way of modifying or playing with, Lauren, is there any way of modifying or playing with the other options to make the traffic come in and keeping the tennis courts? There's another design challenge for you.
To squeeze the building in between the existing tennis courts and a ring road?
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean, an access road around the building? Yeah, we
Oh.
can look at that. But
You could mix and match all of
I
those.
don't think
Yeah,
it
that's
needs
the
a
point.
new option to look at that.
Okay, but you can work it.
I think that you could make it an AR option or an N option, and it would be, I think that's part of the confusion.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's here, is that if you choose an N option, it may end up looking like N7
Yeah,
and be actually started from N3. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But that would happen in the PSR phase. What Gordon was saying is exactly what the intent of these options were, is
Well,
to
he's an architect,
evaluate
so he
them
knows
from Gordon's a genius. So it's to evaluate them from a site access criteria, from a playfield location in relation to the school versus the other fields versus the high school versus the street. Where's parking located that's a great criteria to add. The safety, we kind of lump that into safety of students having to cross. I think there are ways around that. If that's where we end up with a road that rings the building, there are ways that road could be blocked during certain times of day so that there is safety. But it was about certain pedestrian access to the building. It's also, what is the front door? Where is the front door? Are the tennis courts on Lincoln Street? I'm not saying this to advocate in one way or the other, but what if it were the front door of the school that was the thing that you saw on Lincoln Street? And I'm not trying to be political, but it's just to evaluate all of those things and what is the priority. We can look at all of them again, and it's not like we're gonna forget that idea. If you removed N7, it doesn't mean that we can never bring that look back again as a building layout. And none of these are buildings. These are really just bubble diagrams. So the adjacencies of the gym to the admin to parking, that can all be explored further in the next phase as well.
so really what we're deciding, we still have this motion on the table, and is what we talk about on November 1st that could be politically, and I think that there's a possibility that you could talk about these other options with the tennis courts in there and say, this is why they're still there.
We're looking at everything.
We're looking at everything.
You're not, though.
I prefer we've looked at everything.
Yeah.
And here's some of the things that we've looked at and eliminated. That's my personal vote. And if you have feedback, we'd love to hear it, but we already took that step. And that way you show that you've looked at everything, and yes, you admit that it's already done, but maybe there'll be a groundswell to have you reconsider.
Sarah, what's your reservations for showing them all?
So if you want to include those things that eliminate the tennis courts, you got to put the tennis courts somewhere in the plan.
Yeah.
Understood.
That's the bottom line in my book. And then when you do the budget, it becomes quite obvious that
Very well.
that there better be a really good reason to do that. So if people feel that and environmentally, it's in the riverfront, it's closer to the well, and
The building,
it's lower.
yeah.
It's lower, and it's clay.
So
And
those
so-
might be the perfect
and-
reasons
and-
why
and
it's
so
excluded at
it's-
some point.
Yeah, and so it's, we know what I don't want to say I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but, so. The other thing I was just going to say that it's related to the tennis courts, actually, is this renovation. We haven't talked about your second addition renovation, minimum additions. One of the things that's not in your scoring matrix, but the operational costs of a sprawling building are significantly more in terms of maintaining your building envelope, probably heating and cooling it, keeping it comfortable, maintenance, and operational costs of that one in particular are, astronomically more. I have to believe. And then, so, and you basically gonna have to rebuild the whole building in pieces somehow. So that the construction costs, I would think, would be more as well, but it just operational costs on the addition, the sprawling addition, ad reno, whatever that one is.
AR1.
AR1
Yep.
strikes me as just a huge downside. And then, so we had.
I think one way to say that is for the effort that you're going through, you might not be getting the biggest bang for your buck.
Right, it might be, yeah.
So we still have this motion on the table. Do you want to continue with your motion?
Or would you like me to amend it to say that, because I think with respect to what Andy's saying is if we keep the tennis court on the site and explore options where at least we have that area set out, we'll be able to evaluate if there's enough value in a different option that actually makes it worthwhile to move the tennis courts, which is gonna be a fee that doesn't add to education. So it's $1 million, so it's $1 million that we're not gonna get any reimbursement for, and it does not contribute directly to the education. It could be that the tennis court moves and something so spectacular comes out of it, otherwise that you could say that much of that $1 million enhanced the educational program. I'm skeptical, but I guess I would say that I would not want to see the tennis courts move from the site, and I would prefer to see them stay in their existing location. But I think maybe with respect to due diligence and looking at everything, it's worth looking at an option where there's somewhere else on the site.
We could limit the options that show that. We could show the one sort of representative example, maybe, that explores that. Maybe the N6.
I guess the point is, don't show anything that doesn't meet the tennis program somehow.
Right.
Yeah, we need to amend the options that include a building or something where the tennis courts are currently. We need to amend those and qualify it by saying that
You
the
shut
tennis
it
court
down.
would be located.
A new building with new tennis courts.
At a minimum.
So we still have this motion on the table. We're gonna vote on it?
What's the motion?
Yeah, I think this is foolish.
So the motion was to eliminate AR3, N6, and N7 because they eliminate the tennis court.
Right. Leave it that way and see what happens.
Okay, so.
Knowing that, to what Lauren said, that concepts that exist in N6 and N7 and AR3 are not necessarily being thrown off the table, but what's being thrown off the table is any site configuration that does not have a tennis court in it.
Okay, that's different. Everybody hear that?
I move that we amend the motion to acknowledge that those options that show the current tennis court being taken up could easily show the tennis courts displayed somewhere else on the site.
Can we vote on one at a time? I'd like to separate them personally.
He's just amending them.
No, but I'm saying I'd like to vote on one that says,
Just get rid of
get
them.
rid of them altogether,
Right.
and then if
I
we
agree.
shoot that down because we want them, then we can look at one, because to me, I would like to have the option personally
Okay.
to vote on one.
So you're getting
That's
shut
got
down, Andy.
No, just, we're not touching them at all.
He's getting shut down on the first vote.
So,
Okay.
and that's just a proposal.
Okay,
Vote is to eliminate any sites that have moving the
Options.
tennis courts.
so that's
Yeah.
AR3, N6, N7.
You still use the
All those in-
design.
Yeah.
You still use the
Yep,
design.
right.
It's site
But just
configuration.
the site, the tennis courts will remain where they are.
All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Oh, shit, I didn't read.
Can we go back?
So how
We
many,
need the
one,
clickers.
two, Jay, do you have a hand up?
vote.
Okay, one,
Because we're all so shy.
3, 4, 5, 6. 6 no's, and then, who are the,
Where guys?
1, 2, 3.
You have to put your
4,
hand
5,
out. You
6.
can't do both.
Oh, wait.
Wait.
Sorry, I
You
had
gotta
my
be clear on
hand
the
up.
vote.
6.
Wait,
How
can we
you
do
just
one more?
voted both of them?
No, I only voted for,
It was 6
you
and
count me
I
6.
voted for the
Twice?
motion. Can we do it one more time?
Do it one more
If you're in
time.
favor of the motion, raise your hand. Okay?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right?
1, 2, 3,
Just like
4, 5, 6, 7. John's got his.
Oh, I'm
hand up.
sorry. John's saying 7,
No, I
John,
didn't
yes.
vote the first time.
Okay,
And
7.
then no's are
Like 12 angry men.
1,
You
2,
saw that the other day.
okay, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my God.
Sorry.
Coin flipping.
6 no's, 7
That's a
no's.
good Hancock.
7.
Seven
Seven
yes,
voters
6
say.
no's.
7 yes, 6
So we're
no.
taking out 7, 6, and AR3.
Now, Andy can make a motion to consider
Yes,
N6,
thank you.
7, and AR3 with tennis court somewhere else.
So,
Wait, say that again? I'm sorry.
That was Andy's motion.
Yeah,
So-
you just said, yeah, because she missed it.
Andy's motion.
The motion is to revise those 3 options that show the tennis court being taken away
Discussion.
to relocate the
Make the
tennis
point.
court on the site,
Show them
to
relocated.
represent those options still.
And that's motion made, Lisa seconded. Okay?
We're just gonna put, you're gonna show the tennis court on those 3 options,
Yeah.
someplace else.
I think that's a worse idea, by a lot.
Okay.
I think that, I mean, people are gonna say, oh, look, there's, the tennis courts have been moved. I mean,
Well, that's a one-dimensional view, George.
I understand, but it also makes the
But we're
entire
here to
school committee
consider-
look like a bunch of boobs.
Well, we're here to consider all dimensions, though, and we have to suffer
George,
the slings and
I
arrows
honestly don't
along
think
the
that the
way.
tennis courts will be moved, and I think my
Yeah,
preference would be
that-
the
I
one.
tend to agree,
where the
George.
tennis
That
court
is
stays
exactly my
where they
point. I
are.
mean,
So, so my comment then
wasting
is,
time
so I
and
think,
breath.
But this is an intent to just say we vetted the options, I believe that's all it is. And I'm
Well-
I'm not sure even the ones that voted to keep the 3 options want this tennis court removed.
so before,
We
my
should have that
person,
vote, who wants the tennis court removed?
that's what we're voting on now, that is what
That's
this
what
is.
you're voting on.
No, I mean really removed.
So my only comment on this vote is, I think the question comes down to whether you believe that this committee should be vetting the option now, or whether you believe that this committee should be putting the options out to the community and hearing that feedback and then vetting the options. And with this particular topic, I'll just preview my vote. I think the committee should be vetting that option now. And there have been other votes similar to this, like sites, where I thought the committee should vet the option later. So I preferred to keep some of the sites on the list, like Sweeney, even though I hear a lot of people say it's a non-starter. In this case, for tennis, I would prefer to have us do that job now, knowing that it can always come back if some mathematical equation or something says, we found out a great new option. So that's the end of my comment.
So I'm going to give you the bumper sticker that said, "Don't blame me." Okay, so everyone understands what we're voting on?
No.
Okay.
So if,
Andy, it's Andy's motion, explain it.
just modify those 3 options that show the tennis court going away to Sarah's point. Locate the tennis court,
Elsewhere.
account for it elsewhere.
Can I just offer a counter point
Elsewhere
of
on
view
the
to
current
Avi's
site.
point of view?
Yeah.
Which is, just think about the robust discussion we've had at this table and the fact that there are varying points of view. There may be some value to let it see the light of day before we fully lock into a determination, which is just the counterpoint to Avi, which we often do.
So the other,
So,
I'm gonna,
which I think can be valuable.
Can I also just say that one of the things that I think that's very dangerous about that is that it implies that we can build that close to the road. And I do not believe that we will succeed, that we could march straight down the path, and when we go to the Concom, they're gonna say, well, you just had all these other alternatives that are further away from the river, and it's closest to Zone 1, and all these other things that you already litigated, and that but when you give people the option that there's an alternative, that building in that area, that people will think of it and dream big to, you know, like Gordon did, about how to, and I worry, even if they were free, I don't believe that we can build there. I think we know that. I think we've been down that road, and if you give people the option, this alternative view, they give the team who hasn't been here and lived it, the idea that they can come up with something there. When we go to the Concom, we're adding 6 months.
She just weighed me.
Well, I don't know, I'd like to weigh in on that too, because I think if I would have approached that whole design exercise, I think the front door would want to be located more in Lincoln. And then we would have looked at how do we compose a building that faces Lincoln more or has a different approach to that whole traffic configuration. And then we could have studied what conservation restrictions we'd have and probably modified it. So we're judging this right now on criteria, as Andy said, that were given to us 6 years ago, whenever it was. We have different criteria now, we have a much larger site now. And so that allows us the flexibility to perhaps consider tennis courts elsewhere. I personally, I don't like the sight of those tennis courts, but my son probably uses them more than anybody in town, and I love the fact that they're there. And I probably, in the end, will vote that they're to remain there because we've already changed the topography and so on. But I do think it's important we go through the exercise.
So my point, we've allowed him to dream.
I think it's a great.
I think by not showing, I think people will dream regardless of what we present. And showing that we considered a wide variety of options for siting the building, some that may seem crazy, some that are very safe, shows that we did do our due diligence and we thought through all of these things.
But these options are all still part of the public record. It's not like,
Yeah, they're out there and we'll vote on this. I guess my only comment is, I'm a big believer in due diligence. I feel like we have done significant due diligence on this in the form of multiple years of legal work around this, and there's a lot of documentation of that. And so maybe we need, again, to my feeling is, if it did go the way I'm proposing, I want the minutes to show what the reasons are why we voted that way. And I like your point of view. I mean, that's another, they're basically opposite points of views, and I can see your side too. So, you know, whatever the committee decides, they decide. I would also want to see that building face that building.
For perspective, at the first community meeting, we showed at possible sites as, I think, the Brook Street field, which I think people would be perhaps more up in arms about that site than considering moving the tennis courts. It would be a close battle.
this is an hour-long meeting, right? An hour, hour and a half on the first. And we're already going to go through site, which is going to be, I don't know how much time we're going to have. I don't know. So we want to call vote?
Well, can I ask one question, though? I think you raised a really good point. Is it accurate to say that these options are in areas that we can't build in? We did the environmental analysis and the civil analysis, which showed where we could build on the site. But now, what I hadn't considered is what you two are bringing up is that appears to be an area that we cannot build in.
Well,
It's a
the
degraded
wellhead
That's
zone
built
1
on.
is actually away from where the tennis courts are. That's a zone 2 area. And I think there's still opportunities.
It's degraded.
Yeah.
It's degraded, exactly.
That's the bucket for it right now.
And you still may have to do some sort of mitigation, you know, if you say we're building in that or, you know.
And the truth of the matter is, if you were really to build in that location, you'd probably fill back some of that, you know, because the tennis courts are sunken down in there, you'd probably build some of that back up with more fill.
And the building would more than likely be on geopiles because of clay and everything else, but,
Okay, so all those in favor of showing the tennis courts relocated elsewhere
For these options.
for these options, A3, N6, N4?
And 7.
Keeping
And
the
6,
options
7.
with tennis courts located elsewhere.
Yes. All those in favor say aye. Or
Aye.
put your hands up, because I'm not gonna.
Great. Which is
I
it?
don't know what I
Upper?
want.
Well, you gotta pick one.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. 7, yes.
And we're happy to do that.
And then it'll, okay, all those against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is that 5? 4,
1,
6.
2, 3, 4.
6. 6
1,
and
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay. So you know what you're doing,
Up to
because
the
I
left
have
vote.
no clue what you're doing.
We're gonna, ultimately, we're gonna leave those 3 options in, but it's gonna show tennis courts somewhere else.
On the site.
Somewhere on the site.
On this site.
So somewhere in here, we'll show those 3 tennis courts.
Perfect, great, and it may not, oh, we'll just, that's what we're gonna do. Okay, let's, everyone good? George?
George may never
George,
come
you're
back.
presenting these options.
Okay.
Guys, I wanted to say one thing, because you also brought up the conservation concern, and I think you have to make sure that you have your wetland scientists look at this area, because it's, I think you've been through that, right?
No, not that area, but you're right, it is.
But in
bad.
particular, the
Very low.
entrance.
It's a low area
Yes.
over there. Yep.
And it borders that wetland here.
I'm sorry, what are you pointing to?
Sorry, I'm pointing at the area that currently, when you come out of the school driveway and you get onto Summer Street,
Yep,
So right here.
there's a.
Right here.
That's
Yeah.
right.
okay,
Yep.
Summer Street, yep.
Because if, I could go back to the.
That's where those
existing-
circles are.
Let's see.
You'd have to-
I'm trying to get into it.
Less also already replicated.
So, the existing building goes down into the setback here,
Yeah.
and then right off of the paved area, it drops down
Yeah.
7 feet, 8 feet, something like that. And then, so all this is a bowl, and then it rises back up right at the tree line at the street.
Yeah, and that,
We need to have some
you know,
sidewalk
I think that if we have more exiting
now,
or
again,
access
on this site.
to and from summer, you know, that could be a constraint.
Correct.
Would you and Gordon take people for a walk on Saturday?
Violates that, looking at it just yesterday, we actually have to fill a ton of land.
You want, when you.
Oh,
In order to even get that
Yeah.
little loop to work.
Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it, I'm just saying that there's
Right.
additional cost.
He does need to, right, yeah.
We need to go up on the site.
Okay,
So,
let's talk about the PDP.
so PDP report,
So can I just ask, why did we do this?
so what we were trying to do was to try to figure out whether there were any fatal flaws in the design options that were, that we've developed so far. We're essentially trying to find out where your red lines are with the.
We think,
What did he say?
sorta, kinda.
Nothing, sorry.
Dan,
I mean,
are
'cause-
you interested in our opinion of the building configurations too? Obviously, there's.
Anything at all that strikes you as immediately objectionable. And we came up with one thing, and we debated
Well, no,
it.
we came up with the perimeter of the ad reno, that's the other operating. I came up with that as
Yeah, I think,
a gross objection to that one.
I do think it'd be my own wish is that we put sustainability and perhaps even like
Yes.
a net zero energy goal for the project, which would, I think, drive us toward a
Consolidate.
certain
Yeah.
consolidated design.
Yeah, that'll kill N6 and
Not-
5.
not exclusively,
and 2.
Right.
Yeah, so a bit of a response to why the exercise happened is
Yeah.
because, while it doesn't carry a significant amount of weight in that, we're not looking to pick the highest scores or drop the lowest scores necessarily. It's that we're gonna be doing a very similar exercise at or near the end of PSR, where we're picking one. And it's gonna look very similar to this, and it's gonna have maybe different criteria, maybe we add one, but I think at that time, it's gonna be much more concrete. This was really just an exercise to facilitate this whole discussion, because without it, it would have been very, very difficult. But in PSR time, it's gonna be, I think, a little more,
That point,
exact.
what your criteria are really can affect your scoring. 'Cause- so I think it,
100%, right? And then somebody mentioned at some point, there hasn't been any weighting established to the political reconfiguration of the tennis courts versus dollars. And that relationship probably isn't a one-to-one. And so that hasn't been considered either.
Okay, so tell us about the PDP and when we're gonna see it.
So it is presently on the Dropbox,
Okay,
in a folder called PDP report.
yep,
Draft sections of the report are there. Most of the elements are in there at this point. There are a couple of sections where we need to check on a couple of items, so a phrase or some words might be highlighted in yellow, and those are things we're yet to verify, but the bulk of the report is there, ready for you to review. The one section that I haven't added in there yet are the appendices, which I will add tomorrow morning, and the evaluation of alternatives. I didn't get a chance to upload it today, but I will upload it tomorrow. So, and then the other piece that's not there yet is the local action and approval, and that's all going to come at the very end after you have your vote on the 6th.
So when do you want feedback from us?
So
What's the
what we
deadline?
would, so what we would recommend is that there are some volunteers out of this group, 2, 3 volunteers, however many you like, that will take a pass at looking at that, and whether you want to divvy up the work so different people do different sections. Some of these sections are pretty straightforward in just a couple page or two, but just we'd ideally like to find somebody who'd be willing to go, some people to go through and to just take a look and provide their comments. And ideally, we would get those comments in time next week. We'd suggest maybe by the 31st, so that we have enough time to pick up those comments and then provide a final draft to be posted in advance of the meeting on the 6th.
Can you just go back one slide there? So there's a few categories that are probably going to deserve the most attention, and that's the educational program, as we kind of discussed a little bit about tonight, trying to separate which list or just have comments and feedback about some of that stuff that we can bring to the committee. The site development, that's going to recap the site selection and the process we went over the previous 4 or 5 meetings, and then the evaluation of alternatives, which was largely the discussion we had tonight. And so there'll be sections of each option and narratives describing them. And so if there's gross miscalculations or errors or omissions in that, we'd like to hear your feedback to include those, so we can bring that back to you on the 6th.
I
So
do
those
think
3
the
categories.
space summary is also, given the earlier discussion, is really important.
And that goes hand in hand with the
With the
ed plan,
program.
the two together.
Maybe I lump them together.
Okay, so Sarah said she would be willing to read. Anyone else?
Come to something.
Gordon.
The whole thing or just sections of it?
You and I are going to divide some up, divide some up, right? Right? Want to read some? I'll read.
Yeah, no, I'll do local action and approvals. I mean, that's kind of up my alley.
Well, that section hasn't been posted yet, it won't until after your, that's essentially the letter created by the committee here certifying that the vote was taken.
Okay.
So
Oh,
that
that's
doesn't
cheating. You can't
exist
take that
until.
one.
Yeah, it's a form letter.
The formal.
Okay.
Existing
Somebody will need to
conditions?
put it on district level.
Okay, Lisa will do it. Okay, great. We'll work on it. Okay. We've got people. Sarah, Gordon, Lisa, Annie, Alva, and
I'll look at it.
and Andy.
So the things that are in gray here are things that are still in development.
Yep.
So we know that the ed plan is still in development, and as a consequence, the space summary is also in development, and the local action approval won't come until.
Can you sort of list, is there a draft space summary there?
Say again?
Is there a draft space summary in the Dropbox?
There is.
So
Okay.
just on the dates, just want to recap what I think I just heard. So we're asking anybody, there's draft documents up there right now, take a look. Return any comments by the 31st. Final updated PDP goes in what, November 2nd?
Thursday?
Thursday?
Yeah, that's where we'll finish shooting.
And then we're here on Monday the 6th.
Correct.
Okay.
And there may be some final adjustments that come out of the meeting on the 6th, and, any approval at that time could be contingent on, wording change here or there, or some adjustment in some sections.
It
But
gets
doesn't the
submitted
school
on the
committee,
9th.
the school committee approves it the next night,
Correct.
so it needs to be kind of buttoned
If
up for
there's
that.
minor tweaks, then
Yeah.
adjust it.
Do you have a joint meeting?
There's a reason. We've been
Yeah.
looking at, we can't do it.
Get assessment review.
Yeah. Okay. Steve.
We've reviewed next meetings.
Yep.
Went over the schedule real quick. Any other topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance?
I have a little list here.
Monday.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thanks, everybody.